has, 5 out of 7 successful. And in comparison, around this point, the Soviet Union is definitely beginning to be on the back foot. It's unable to keep up. It's still flying a lot of spacecraft which aren't reaching orbit. They build, of course, the Luna sample return spacecraft, and these are much more conventional landers. These land on the surface, they collect some samples, and then they have to fly back. And they actually land pretty much in Mare Crisium, where Blue Ghost has landed. And some of those failed to land. Some of those fell over after landing. But the Soviet Union did actually land 2 successful rovers on the moon, the Lunokhod. And those actually operated for longer than any of the Apollo missions on the surface, and they were able to drive further, right? In fact, they held the record for the longest traverse on another world until the modern Mars rovers were finally able to stretch their legs. But then, after the sort of mid 70s, people lose interest in the moons. I mean, like literally nobody launches a moon mission in the 1980s. We then get a bunch of orbiters that fly out, and orbiters are cool. Some of them drop stuff onto the surface of the moon to get like a lunar impact. And then in the last 10 years or so, we get to the modern era of lunar landers, starting with Chang'e 3. And the Chang'e program has been amazingly successful. They have actually pushed the limits, they've done things that nobody else have done. And they've been able to do this because they are a very well funded government program. China is very much operating in the mode of trying to get international prestige and using modern technology to score these firsts, getting the first landers on the far side of the moon, the first samples from the far side of the moon. And I think that's the best illustration of how successful a well funded lunar lander program can actually be. India doesn't really have the resources that China has, but they've tried to make it work and they've had a success. Russia, they called their spacecraft Luna 25, trying to act like it's an extension of the Soviet Luna program, but they're not the Soviet Union anymore. In fact, a lot of Soviet expertise was in Ukraine, which, guess what, is not part of Russia. And Russia's invasion of Ukraine meant international sanctions, which meant that they couldn't buy certain critical aerospace components, which meant they had to develop some important stuff for Luna 25 domestically. That messed up their schedule and very likely killed the mission. And then there's the US that decided instead of building a government program, it was going to employ the powers of the free markets and capitalism and basically get private companies to do things as cheaply as possible, have multiple competitors. But of course, if you're wanting a market to exist, you need supply and demand. So NASA's role is to create the demand by doing the science, funding the scientific instruments so that they can be on the spacecraft so that they can pay somebody to transport them to the moon so the technology can be developed. And that's how we get amazing footage like this from the